The river ran cold and swift that evening, surface catching the last streaks of a fading sunset, turning the water into molten golden shadow at once. She stood at the edge, the hem of her dress brushing the wet rocks beneath her feet, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her swollen belly. The world around her felt unbearably heavy, the wind whispering through the cottonwoods like it carried secrets too old to speak. Every footstep she had taken for the past months, every promise she had believed in, now seemed like dust slipping through her fingers. Her breath came in short, uneven gasps as the current called to her, daring her to let go, promising silence, and freedom from a pain she could no longer name. A figure appeared through the trees, moving as if part of the shadows themselves. The man's presence was sudden, yet gentle, like the hush of dusk over the prairie. And yet there was something about him that made her heart seize. He did not speak at first, merely watched, his dark eyes calm and penetrating. She sensed a strange honesty in him, a quiet strength she had longed for, but never found in the townsfolk who whispered behind lace curtains in saloons. His skin bore the sun like leather, and his movements carried the rhythm of the land itself, every step in tune with the wind and water. "Do you still believe in love?" he asked, his voice low but certain, carrying over the river like a stone skipping across water. The question startled her so deeply she nearly lost her balance. Love. It seemed a cruel joke now, a phantom that had abandoned her when she needed it most. Her mind reeled with memories, promises made in candlelight, laughter shared in fleeting moments under the open sky. And then betrayal, fear, and solitude that had become her closest companions. She wanted to turn away, to push past him and the words, to let the river claim her before hope could ever return. But she could not. Something in his gaze rooted her to the spot, something raw and unspoken that pulled at the corners of her grief. He did not approach with the swagger of men who claim dominion over the land or the cold politeness of strangers passing by. He simply stood, a silent witness to the storm inside her, and waited. And in that pause, she felt the first stirrings of doubt about the path she had chosen, a flicker of curiosity, about what it might mean to hear another heart, untainted by lies or loss, asking for something as impossible as hope. The river below churned, pulling at the edges of her fear, promising oblivion with every rushing wave. Yet there was tension in the air, a crackling anticipation that made the hairs on her arms rise. She sensed, without knowing why, that this encounter was not a random crossing of paths, but something that had been written in the land and wind long before either of them existed. The sun dipped lower, and the shadows deepened around her feet, blurring the line between safety and surrender. The water looked darker now, more menacing, yet more alive, as if the river itself held its breath, waiting for her choice. He stepped closer, just enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence, without feeling threatened. "You've carried more than anyone should," he said softly, "and yet here you stand, holding on. Why?" His question was simple, but it carried weight, pressing against the walls she had built around her heart. She wanted to answer, to shout her pain into the wind, to confess the loneliness and betrayal that had driven her here. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled with fear and shame and the stubborn remnants of hope she had almost forgotten existed. She looked down at the river again. The water reflected the twilight like a dark mirror, and for a moment, she imagined stepping forward and disappearing beneath the surface. She imagined leaving behind the ache of waiting for love that had never been returned. The judgment of the town, the cold eyes of strangers who measured her worth with suspicion. And yet, even as her resolve wavered, she heard the faint rustle of the trees behind her and felt the rhythm of someone else's heart, steady and strong, beating in time with her own. "Do you?" he asked again, his voice barely above the whisper of wind through the leaves. There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity, a gentle insistence that demanded an answer from the part of her she had buried long ago. She wanted to shake her head, to tell him that love was a lie she no longer could believe in, that her life was nothing but a chain of misfortune. But the words she had rehearsed in the dark of her room faltered. There was something about the way he stood, something that made her heart inch forward despite herself, something that dared her to imagine life beyond despair, The moment stretched, fragile and suspended, as the river roared at the rocks below and the wind tugged at the edges of her dress. She felt the tension in her body, the tight coil of fear and desperation, and she realized that the choice before her was not simply between life and death, but between surrendering to the past and taking the first step into the unknown. She had been running from everything she had lost, yet in the shadow of this stranger, she felt the faint glimmer of possibility, the suggestion that maybe, just maybe, love could exist beyond betrayal. That hope could rise from the ashes of heartbreak. He extended a hand. Slow and steady, the gesture unassuming but deliberate, as if he had learned patience from the river itself. "You don't have to face it alone," he said, and the words were like a soft current against the rough edges of her despair. She wanted to reach for him, to grasp at the lifeline he offered, yet doubt clawed at her chest. How could she trust a stranger? How could she believe in something she had almost forgotten existed? And still, the question lingered in the air, heavier than the night that was settling over the river. "Do you still believe in love?" It was not just a question, it was a challenge, a spark thrown into the darkness, daring her to decide whether to step back from the edge or to leap into something unknown. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of the river, wet earth, and the faint trace of smoke from a distant campfire. Her heart pounded, a drumbeat that seemed to echo across the water, filling the space between fear and courage. She felt the weight of the life she carried inside her, fragile warmth of the future she had not yet allowed herself to imagine. And then, in that suspended moment, everything froze: the river, the wind, the stranger's steady gaze, as if the world itself was waiting for her to choose. She closed her eyes, the cold bite of the evening air pressing against her cheeks, and for the first time in months, she imagined a different path. A path where she might survive, where she might feel something beyond sorrow, where she might learn that love, despite all evidence to the contrary, could still reach her. And yet the fear lingered, gnawing at the edges of her hope, whispering that one wrong step could send her into the depths. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried, its voice slicing through the quiet of the twilight. She opened her eyes to find the stranger still standing there, silent, patient, waiting for the answer she could not yet give. The river surged below, restless and unyielding, a reminder that time would not wait for her indecision. She felt the tension coil tighter in her chest, the pull of the water and the pull of the unknown intertwined, leaving her poised on the edge of something that could change everything. And in that fragile, suspended moment, the question hung between them like a lifeline. "Do you still believe in love?" She did not move immediately. The cold from the river licked at her ankles, but her mind drifted elsewhere, back to the small town she had left behind just days ago. It had been a place of wooden sidewalks and painted storefronts, the kind of town that seemed trapped in time, where gossip traveled faster than the wind and secrets were buried only shallowly. She remembered the narrow streets where she had once felt safe, the faces of neighbors who had smiled politely while whispering behind curtains, and the hollow promises of men who had never meant to stay. Every memory weighed on her like stones in a sack, and yet somehow, standing at the edge of the river, those memories felt distant, almost unreal, like echoes from a life that had belonged to someone else. Her own story had begun quietly enough, with small dreams that seemed reasonable at the time, a modest home, a family, a simple life. But the world had a way of twisting the simplest dreams into burdens she could no longer bear. The man who had promised her love had vanished the moment hardship touched their door. Friends she thought she could trust had revealed themselves as opportunists, their sympathy fleeting and fragile. And through it all, the child she carried had been both a blessing and a burden, a reminder of joy she had not yet earned, and a constant echo of responsibility she feared she could not fulfill. The stranger by the river seemed to sense the weight she carried, though he did not press her for answers. He merely waited, and there was something commanding about the way he moved, something that spoke of quiet knowledge and survival in a world that had not been kind to either of them. He did not speak of pity or judgment, only of possibility, and that was what unsettled her most. She had grown accustomed to the idea that no one could understand her, No one could step into the tangled shadows of her life and offer anything but shallow comfort or empty words. And yet here was someone who asked a question that was neither intrusive nor foolish. A question that seemed to slice through the fog surrounding her heart and leave a small trembling opening in its place. Her mind wandered back even further, to a time before the town, before the promises and the betrayals. She remembered the plains beyond the hills, where the wind ran free and the sky stretched endlessly overhead. She had spent days walking those open fields, feeling the sun burn her face and the soil beneath her boots. It was there she had first believed in the idea of something greater than the small, narrow life that had been prescribed to her. She had believed in freedom, in the wide horizons that seemed a promise that the world could hold more than fear and disappointment. And she had believed in love, naively perhaps, but with a conviction that had once made her heart feel limitless. The stranger stirred, breaking the spell of her memories. "The river is restless tonight," he said, his voice calm but carrying a note that made her shiver. "It knows more than we do, and it will not forgive lightly." She looked at him, startled, sensing that his words were meant for more than just the current rushing below. They were a warning, a guide, a challenge. She realized suddenly that she was not simply facing the water. She was standing at the threshold of something far larger, a force that could change her life in ways she had never imagined. He crouched slightly, his gaze fixed on the river as if reading it like a map. "I have walked these lands for years," he said, almost to himself. "I have seen people give in to the currents, and I have seen others defy them. Do not think it is easy. There are trials here that test the heart, and not all who step forward survive them." His words made her pulse quicken, and yet there was a strange reassurance in them. Survival did not mean ease or comfort. It meant choice. And for the first time in months, she felt a tiny flicker of that choice within her. Her fingers clenched into fists at her sides. She wanted to speak, to ask why he had appeared when she needed a reason to give up, why he seemed to know the questions she had buried too deep to voice. But the words caught in her throat. Instead, she only nodded faintly, letting the tension stretch between them. She realized she did not know his name, his story, or his purpose, and yet it felt wrong to step away. Something had pulled her here, to this precise spot, at this precise moment, and she was certain it was not mere coincidence. The stranger's eyes softened slightly, and for the first time, he offered a small, understanding smile. "The world you left behind," he said, "was never yours to hold on to. But the world ahead, that is unclaimed, and it waits for those willing to risk it." Risk. The word echoed through her mind, carrying with it every fear she had felt since discovering she was alone in the world. She thought of the baby inside her, the life she was meant to protect, and a wave of desperation rose alongside the fear. Could she risk herself for something as fragile as hope? Could she take a step away from despair and toward something unknown? The sound of movement caught her attention, a rustle in the brush behind them, and she spun, heart hammering. Shadows shifted among the trees, and for a brief moment she thought she saw figures, men on horseback, their silhouettes sharp and deliberate against the fading light. Her breath caught. She did not know if they were friend or foe, and the thought that someone had been following her all along made her stomach twist. But when she looked again, the figures were gone, as if they had been nothing more than a trick of her eyes. The wind and the dying light conspiring to play with her mind, the stranger noticed her unease but did not speak of it. Only shifted closer, his presence steady and grounding. "They are part of the land too," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. "The eyes that watch, the whispers that follow this place is alive, and it tests everyone who walks its paths. The river, the hills, the wind, they all have a memory, and they remember those who have given up and those who have fought to survive." He paused, letting the words settle. "It is not a place for the weak of heart, but neither is it cruel beyond measure. It gives as much as it takes." She stared at him, trying to imagine what he meant, and in that moment, fragments of stories she had heard in the town began to surface, the tales of travelers who had vanished into the wilds, of children left behind, of fortunes found and lost along the river's bends. She realized then that the world beyond the town's wooden fences was not gentle or predictable. It was wild, untamed, and full of its own rules she had never learned, but which she would have to face if she stepped away from the edge. Her thoughts drifted back to the child she carried. The life inside her was a fragile spark, and she knew she could not abandon it without feeling a weight she might never shake. Yet the river called, the wind tugged, and the land whispered that danger and opportunity were never far apart. She felt the tension in her chest tighten, the same tension that had driven her to the river's edge in the first place. And now, with the stranger beside her, the question of survival was no longer only about her. It was about whether she could find a way to protect this new life in a world that had not shown her mercy. He shifted his gaze toward the horizon, where the last light of day bled into shadow. "I have seen more than I care to count who thought they were alone, who thought hope was gone," he said. "And yet sometimes it returns in the most unexpected way. Sometimes it finds you when you are ready to surrender." His words felt like a promise and a warning at the same time. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the possibility that life could hold something better, but fear clawed at her thoughts. The river roared below, impatient and unyielding, and she realized that her choice, when it came, would have consequences far beyond her own understanding. She swallowed hard, her throat tight, and looked at the stranger again. He did not offer advice or pressure her, only held the space for her decision, and she felt the first flicker of trust spark in her chest. Maybe he was not a savior, not someone who could erase the pain of her past. But perhaps, in this vast, dangerous land, he could be a guide. Someone who could help her navigate the currents of a life she had never learned to steer. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet soil and distant smoke, and the river seemed to rise slightly, its waves lapping against the rocks like a restless beast. She felt the tension in her body coiling tighter, the pull of the water and the pull of the unknown entwined. Somewhere deep inside, she knew that whatever choice she made, the night ahead would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. And so she stayed, trembling at the edge of the river. The stranger's gaze steady on her, the wind tugging at her hair and dress, the water below promising both danger and the chance for something more. The question lingered between them, a delicate thread of possibility in a world that had taught her to fear. Do you still believe in love? And for now, that question hung unanswered, like a shadow that would not be chased away, as the darkness crept closer and the river waited patiently for the first step she had yet to take. She finally shifted her weight, stepping back from the river's edge, though not completely away. Her feet sank slightly into the damp earth, and she realized that every movement felt heavier than it should, weighed down by the fears and doubts she had carried for months. The stranger said nothing, only watching, as if he understood that her hesitation was a battle in itself. The wind tugged at her hair and dress, the water beneath roared as if impatient for her decision, and the air seemed to vibrate with unspoken possibilities. She felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief for not giving in, dread for the unknown that still lay ahead. "Why are you here?" she finally asked, her voice trembling but deliberate. "Why now? When I... Her words faltered, and she swallowed hard, uncertain how to finish the thought. She did not want to admit aloud the depth of her despair, not even to a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. The man tilted his head slightly, the wind catching the edges of his cloak. "Because sometimes the land calls for those who think they have lost everything," he said softly. "Sometimes it chooses who will hear it and who will not. You hear it tonight, and so you must decide whether to walk forward or remain behind." His gaze held hers with an intensity that made her shiver. It was not a gaze of judgment, but one that measured her courage and resolve as if he could see into the very fibers of her heart. She felt the river again, not just as water, but as a force that seemed to mirror her inner turmoil. She thought of the life she carried inside her, the small life she had promised herself she would protect, and the uncertain road ahead. Every step away from the water felt like a tiny act of defiance, a rebellion against the despair that had chased her for so long. But every glance at the river reminded her that surrender was still possible, that escape remained just a heartbeat away. Her mind wandered to the town she had fled. She remembered the faces of the townsfolk, the whispered rumors, the accusing glances. How easy it would have been to return, to hide behind familiar walls, to let the world carry on as if nothing had happened. And yet the thought made her chest ache. The town had been a cage disguised as comfort. She had tried to find love there, tried to find security, but the walls she thought protected her had only trapped her in loneliness. That was why she had come to the river, seeking a release she was not yet ready to embrace fully, and why the stranger's presence unsettled her in ways she could not explain. The man's voice cut through her thoughts again. "There are choices in life that come not once but over and over," he said. "You may think you are at the end, but the end is rarely what it seems. Every path has its risks, and every choice carries consequences you cannot yet imagine." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that pressed against her chest, forcing her to consider what she had avoided thinking about for so long. Suddenly, movement came from the tree line again. She froze, the hair on her arms standing straight. Shadows flickered, and a faint rustle of leather and hooves made her heart race. She squinted, trying to see what had stirred, but the dusk made shapes shift and distort. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. The stranger's hand brushed lightly against her shoulder, a grounding presence in the rising tension. "Do not fear what has not yet come," he said, though his eyes tracked the shadows with sharp awareness. She realized then that danger had always been closer than she had imagined. The town, the river, the wilderness, all of it, had its own hidden threats. Now, with the stranger by her side, she felt the duality of vulnerability and protection. A strange mixture that left her both unsettled and strangely alive. Her thoughts returned to the child she carried. Every kick, every flutter inside her belly reminded her of the stakes she could not ignore. Life had become a delicate balance, where one wrong move could shatter everything. Yet in that same realization, she found a spark of determination. She would survive. She had to survive. But survival now seemed far more complicated than simply walking away from despair. The world beyond the river's edge was untamed, unpredictable, and full of challenges she could not yet foresee. The stranger stepped closer, his voice low and deliberate. "The land has a memory," he said. "It remembers those who betray it and those who honor it. Every action leaves a mark. Every choice echoes beyond what you see. If you step forward, you step into that history. It will not forgive lightly." She shivered at his words. It was not a threat. It was a fact of the world he knew. Every life she had touched, every step she had taken, had left traces, some gentle, some harsh, and the river, the wind, the hills themselves seemed aware of them all. Her eyes lingered on the water again. It was no longer just a river. It had become a character in her story, a presence with its own memory and will. She thought of others who might have stood where she now stood, men, women, children, who had faced choices that defined their lives, who had wrestled with fear, hope, and despair. Some had fallen into the currents, their stories lost beneath the waves. Others had found their way forward, shaped and changed by the trials they faced. And now, somehow, she understood that her choice was not only about life and death, but about the kind of person she wanted to be, in a world that tested everyone relentlessly. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint scent of smoke and distant earth, and she realized she was not alone in the larger sense. The land held other presences unseen, but felt the faint whisper of someone watching from a ridge. The distant hoofbeats of travelers moving along hidden paths, the rustle of creatures stirring in the brush. Everything was alive, connected, and aware of her. And as terrifying as it was, there was a strange comfort in the idea that the world did not ignore the brave or the desperate. The stranger's eyes held hers once more, and she saw in them a reflection of the same tension she felt, the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. The pull of fear and the lure of possibility. "You are not alone," he said quietly. "Even if it feels that way, even if the night presses close, there is always a path forward. You must choose to see it, though. You must choose to step." Her chest tightened, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The river called still, insistent, but she felt a tremor of defiance, a whisper of strength that had lain dormant in her for too long. The stranger had not forced her, had not demanded her trust, but simply offered a space to make her own decision. And that simple act had shifted something deep within her. In that moment, she sensed that this was only the beginning of a far larger story, one that involved not only her survival, but the survival of the life growing within her, and the reckoning with the world she had long sought to escape. She could feel the tension building like a storm over the hills, ready to break at any moment, and knew that every choice she made now would ripple outward in ways she could not yet predict. The river roared beneath them, impatient, alive, and dangerous. The wind tugged at her hair and clothes, a reminder that the world beyond the town's fences was untamed and unyielding. And the stranger stood beside her, silent, patient, a presence that felt both protective and mysterious. Somewhere beyond the shadows, dangers and mysteries waited, unknown and uncharted, yet tied to the choices she would make tonight. And in the heart of that tension, the question returned. Echoing across the river and the darkening land, do you still believe in love? It was a question that would not leave her, one that carried the weight of her past, the fragility of her present, and the uncertainty of the future. And as the first stars began to pierce the twilight sky, she realized that whatever path she chose next would set the course for everything she had left, everything she hoped to protect, and everything she had yet to discover. The river waited, the wind waited, the stranger waited, and she stood at the threshold of the unknown, the tension coiling tighter with every heartbeat, as the night stretched before her like a promise and a threat intertwined. The night deepened around them. The last glow of the sunset swallowed by shadows that clung to the riverbanks and the hollows of the hills. The woman's heart thudded so loudly she feared it might betray her, announcing every flicker of fear, every tremor of uncertainty. The stranger had remained close but silent, letting her carry the weight of her thoughts while offering the unspoken assurance that she was not alone. The wind shifted suddenly, sharper now, tugging at her dress and hair as if the world itself were testing her resolve. She swallowed hard, feeling the river's roar below as more than sound. It was alive, a force she could neither control nor ignore. Every fiber of her body wanted to flee back to the town she had left behind, to the hollow comfort of known walls, the place where fear was manageable because it was predictable. But her instincts, sharpened by months of isolation and despair, urged her to stay, to listen to the stranger who seemed to embody the quiet certainty of someone who had walked through storms and survived. The trees rustled again, but this time the movement felt deliberate. Shadows emerged, stretching across the riverbank like creeping fingers. She instinctively took a step back, clutching her belly as if that small motion might shield the life inside her from the danger approaching. The stranger shifted, his body low and alert, eyes scanning the darkness. "They've been following," he said quietly, the words not loud but carrying an authority that made her shiver. "Not all who walk these lands do so openly. Some watch from afar until the moment comes to strike horror to decide what they will take." Fear surged through her, mingling with the adrenaline that made her limbs taut and ready. "Who are they?" she whispered, almost too low for her own ears. The wind tugged at her words, carrying them down to the river, which seemed to respond with a sudden surge, splashing cold spray against the rocks. The stranger's jaw tightened slightly. "That I do not know," he said, "but they are tied to the same path that brought you here. And the river, the land itself, will test all of us tonight." Her mind raced. She thought of the stories she had heard of travelers lost along rivers, of families torn apart by greed, fear, and betrayal. She realized that the danger was not just immediate, it was inevitable. The land demanded more than courage. It demanded judgment, intuition, and the willingness to confront truths she had long avoided. The stranger reached out, brushing a hand lightly against hers, grounding her. "Do not let fear alone guide you," he said. "Trust the river, yes, but trust yourself as well." A sudden rustle to her left made her spin. A shadow detached itself from the trees, barely visible against the darkened landscape. Her breath caught. It was a man, tall and lean, with features obscured by the low light. Behind him, two more figures moved with similar stealth, their presence unmistakably deliberate. Her pulse hammered. She wanted to retreat, to flee into the safety of the unknown woods, but she knew running would not guarantee survival. The river loomed behind her, the stranger at her side, and the shadows in front of her. She was caught between currents of threat and protection, her every choice weighted by danger. The stranger's voice was calm but urgent. "They are here for something," he said. "Perhaps for what you carry, or perhaps for what they believe you can give them. We cannot wait." We must move. She looked at him, panic and hesitation warring within her. Move where? She asked. The river, the trees. I don't know this land. I'll fall if I try to run. He gave her a faint, almost imperceptible nod toward a narrow path that led up the hillside, hidden partially by brush and shadows. Then we move there, he said. The land will protect us if we do not panic. Step carefully. Trust the night and the river, but trust me first. His hand found hers, firm but not forceful, and she felt a strange sense of reliance she had almost forgotten existed. She nodded, taking a breath, and together they began to ascend the path, the river's roar growing faint behind them but not entirely gone. As they climbed, her mind whirled with questions. Who were those men? What had brought them here? And why did the strangers seem certain they would come for her? Every crack of twig underfoot, every shadow cast by the moonlight made her flinch. She realized that survival would require not only courage, but cunning and observation, an awareness of the land, of the people, and of herself that she had never fully cultivated. The stranger glanced back once, his eyes scanning the shadows where the figures had disappeared. They will follow, he said. Always, they are patient, and the land favors no one who underestimates them, but neither are we powerless. The river tests all, but it also rewards those who read its movements. His words carried a rhythm that matched the beat of her heart, offering a strange reassurance, even as danger closed in from every side. They continued upward, the path narrowing, the underbrush scratching at their legs. She stumbled once, almost losing her balance, and felt the stranger's hand steady her. His touch was firm, grounding her, and for a moment she allowed herself to draw strength from it. She realized she had been surviving alone for too long, that fear had been both her prison and her armor. And now, for the first time in months, she felt the weight of partnership not just in the physical sense of someone holding her steady, but in the fragile sense that someone might truly see her and stand beside her through the chaos. The wind shifted again, carrying with it the scent of smoke. A fire, somewhere hidden along the riverbank, flickered against the darkness. The stranger froze, eyes narrowing. They are signaling, he whispered. Someone else is with them, or waiting, perhaps both. Her pulse quickened. The river had been a danger she could comprehend, a force she could respect and even anticipate. But human malice, deliberate and cunning, was unpredictable. The night had become a web of unseen threats, and each step they took seemed to bring them closer to some invisible snare. Her breathing quickened, and she pressed a hand to her belly instinctively. Feeling the small life inside her kick in response to the tension, she realized then that her fear was not just for herself, but for the fragile being she carried. Every step forward was a choice for survival, every glance over her shoulder a reminder of vulnerability. And yet something stronger than fear pushed her on, word a determination that she would not surrender, that she would face whatever waited in the shadows rather than let despair claim her. The path widened briefly, opening onto a rocky outcropping overlooking the river. She could see the water swirling below, dark and powerful, and the distant figures had not yet appeared. But their presence was felt, a pressure in the air that made her stomach tighten. The stranger crouched slightly, surveying the terrain. We have to cross, he said finally, voice low. The river is too close to our pursuers. It will use it against us if we remain. She looked at him, panic rising again. Cross? How? The current. He interrupted with a calm insistence. Step by step. One at a time. The river is wild. Yes, but it responds to those who move with intention. Hesitate, and it will punish us both. Move too fast, and we risk losing the child, losing ourselves. We must be careful. His certainty was unnerving, yet she understood it was not blind confidence. It was knowledge born of experience, of a life spent reading the land and surviving where others had failed. The sound of movement below made her flinch. She could see shadows now, shifting along the far bank, waiting, watching, calculating. The night had grown colder, the wind biting at her exposed skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and smoke. Her pulse thudded in her ears as the river churned beneath them, impatient, alive, testing their resolve. She took a deep breath, feeling the stranger's hand lightly touch hers, and realized that whatever happened next, she would not face it alone. Her thoughts briefly returned to the town, to the life she had left behind, to the stories of loss and betrayal that had driven her here. Every memory seemed to sharpen the stakes of the moment. Every whisper of past pain a reminder that survival now demanded more than courage. It demanded strategy, awareness, and trust. She felt the tension coiled tighter in her chest, a storm gathering inside her. The river's roar and the wind's howl matching the chaos of her thoughts. The stranger glanced at her, a question in his eyes that did not need words. "Are you ready?" She nodded slightly, swallowing hard. Her legs trembled, her body tense, but the determination within her had crystallized. They could not wait. Whatever was coming, whatever danger lurked in the shadows, it would not pause for fear. And neither could she. Below them, the river surged, the shadows stirred, and the night seemed to hold its breath. She felt the tension tighten around her like a vice, every sense alive, every heartbeat a drumbeat echoing across the wilderness. This was the precipice, the moment before the unknown. Every choice, every movement, every decision would carry consequences she could not yet see. And in the darkness, where the river and the shadows converged, where human threat and natural danger intertwined, the final test was waiting. The stranger's hand squeezed hers lightly, grounding her even as the tension reached its peak. She inhaled, ready to step forward, ready to face whatever lay ahead, and knew that the night held the answers, but it would demand everything she had before revealing them. The river roared. The shadows waited. The wind carried a warning, and she stood, heart racing, on the edge of everything she had ever feared in, everything she might hope for. She stepped forward. Each movement deliberate, feeling the cold bite of the night air against her skin and the faint tremor of fear still coiling in her chest. The stranger stayed close, guiding her with quiet confidence, his presence a steady anchor amid the chaos of rushing water and shifting shadows. The river below seemed to recognize her determination, the waves breaking against the rocks with less fury than before, as if the land itself acknowledged her courage. For the first time in months, she felt the fragile spark of hope flicker to life, warming her from within. The shadows that had stalked them from the trees paused, as if reconsidering, unsure of what force they faced. The stranger's eyes remained alert, scanning every movement, but he did not speak. He simply let her feel the weight of her own choices, the responsibility and the strength that had carried her this far. With each step across the rocky outcropping, she began to understand that survival was not just about avoiding danger. It was about embracing the power she had thought lost, trusting in her instincts, and in the guidance of someone who understood the land's secrets. When they reached a small bend in the river, the path widened into a clearing where the moonlight spilled across the earth, revealing the beauty and danger of the wilderness all at once. The river's roar was quieter here, gentler, like a lullaby in contrast to the tension that had gripped her heart. She could see the figures that had followed them now, not as threatening shadows but as tangible humans, hesitant and uncertain. And in that moment, she realized that fear, though powerful, could be faced and even redirected. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was moving forward despite it. The stranger looked at her, a faint smile breaking the tension in his face. "You've come far," he said softly, "and you have done so without surrendering to the darkness." She wanted to speak, to pour out everything she had carried inside for months, the loneliness, the despair, the weight of her past, but the words felt too heavy to release all at once. Instead, she simply nodded, feeling the release of tension she had not even realized she held. The night, the river, the shadows, and the danger had tested her, and she had endured. She took a deep breath, letting the air fill her lungs, and felt the life inside her respond, a gentle reminder of the reason she could not give up. The child was a symbol of hope, fragile but persistent, and in that realization, she found a strength she had doubted existed. The stranger's presence remained steady beside her. But now she understood that it was not he alone who had carried her through the night. It had been her own resolve, her courage and her willingness to face the unknown that had brought them here safely. The figures from the shadows began to retreat, some turning back toward the trees, others lingering briefly before disappearing altogether. It was not a victory born of force or confrontation, but of presence and perseverance. The night's tension ebbed slightly, leaving behind a quiet stillness that was almost sacred. The river flowed gently beneath the moonlight, its voice no longer menacing but soothing, as if acknowledging that the storm had passed. The woman sank to a rock near the riverbank, exhausted but relieved. The stranger crouched beside her, offering no words of praise, only the quiet assurance of solidarity. "The land has tested you," he said finally, "and you have answered with courage. That is all it asks." She looked at him, her eyes searching, wondering if the journey was truly over, but sensing in his gaze that this night had changed more than just the immediate danger, had altered the course of her life. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the depth of relief, the release of tension that had gripped her since she had first approached the river. She thought of the town she had left behind, the empty promises, the shallow friendships, and she realized that they no longer held power over her. She had faced fear, she had survived, and she had discovered strength within herself she had never imagined. The shadows of the past would always linger, but now they no longer dictated her choices. The stranger stood, offering her a hand. "We should move," he said. "There is more ahead, yes, but the river has allowed us this night. Use it wisely." She took his hand, feeling the firmness and reliability of his grip, and allowed herself to be helped to her feet. The world around them seemed quieter now, the dangers still present but diminished, the tension finally giving way to a cautious calm. As they walked along the riverbank, she began to see the wilderness not as a threat but as a place of possibility. The hills, the trees, the river itself, they were no longer obstacles but guides, shaping the path ahead. She realized that life, much like the river, would continue to move forward, carrying her along currents she could not always predict, but currents she could learn to navigate. The stranger's presence beside her reminded her that while she had the strength to endure alone, there was power and trust in allowing others to walk with her through the unknown. Her mind wandered to the question he had asked at the river's edge: "Do you still believe in love?" For so long it had seemed impossible, a phantom that had abandoned her when she needed it most. But now she felt a subtle shift within her, cautious, fragile belief that love in its many forms could exist. Not necessarily in the town she had left, not necessarily in the people who had betrayed her, but in life itself, in connection, in trust, in the quiet moments of survival and hope. They came to a small clearing where the river's current slowed, creating a pool that reflected the moonlight like a silver mirror. She knelt beside it, letting her fingers skim the cool surface, feeling a sense of renewal in the simplicity of the act. The stranger remained nearby, watching but giving her the space to breathe, to reflect, to absorb the magnitude of what she had endured. She realized that the journey had not only been about survival, but about reclaiming herself, her courage, and her belief in what life could offer. In the distance, she could hear the faint rustle of movement, reminders that the world beyond the clearing still held its challenges. But the fear that had once dominated her every thought was now tempered by understanding and resolve. She could face danger, she could protect the life she carried, and she could step into the unknown with the strength born of experience. The river, the shadows, the wind, they had tested her, and she had responded with resilience and determination. The stranger finally spoke again, his voice calm and steady. "The night is not over, but the moment you feared is past. You have chosen life. You have chosen courage. And that choice will carry you further than you can imagine." She looked at him, gratitude and a faint smile breaking through the exhaustion. Words were unnecessary. The bond formed in shared survival needed no language. She had been on the brink of surrender, and yet here she stood, alive and aware, with hope rekindled. As they began to move along the riverbank toward the forest beyond, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. The shadows of the past still lingered, yes, but they no longer controlled her. She had faced the river, faced the unknown, and faced herself and emerged stronger, more aware and more willing to embrace the life ahead. Every step forward was a promise to the child she carried, a pledge to herself, and a testament to the strength she had reclaimed. The moonlight illuminated the path ahead, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future shaped by her choices rather than by fear. She realized that life's currents could be treacherous, that the land could challenge her at every turn, but also that she now possessed the wisdom and courage to navigate them. The stranger walked beside her, not as a guide in control, but as a companion who understood that strength often lies in shared resolve. The river's roar faded behind them, replaced by the gentle rhythm of footsteps on the earth, the whisper of wind through the trees, and the faint promise of dawn. She knew that more challenges awaited, more tests of courage and faith. But she also knew that she would face them with the resilience she had discovered within herself. And in that knowledge, she found peace, a quiet triumph that transcended fear and danger. At last, they paused on a small hill overlooking the river, the moonlight casting silver patterns on the water below. She looked down at the pool, at the reflection of the stars above, and allowed herself a deep breath. She had survived the night, survived the river, survived the fear and despair that had brought her to the edge. And in surviving, she had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that life, even when shadowed by danger, carries the possibility of hope, love, and courage beyond what one can imagine. The stranger stood quietly beside her, his eyes on the river. He said nothing, but the silent understanding between them spoke volumes. She realized that while the world remained unpredictable, and the wilderness beyond the clearing would always hold challenges, she was no longer at the mercy of fear. She had stepped into the unknown, faced it, and emerged with her spirit intact. As the first hints of dawn began to touch the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, she felt the tension of the night release fully. She had crossed the river, faced the shadows, and reclaimed her belief in life, in hope, and in love, not as a naive dream, but as a conscious choice to continue forward. Every heartbeat echoed with newfound strength. Every breath carried the promise of survival and resilience, and every step forward was a commitment to the life she carried and the future she would build. And in that quiet, powerful moment, she understood that the journey was not over, but she had already won the most important victory. She had chosen to live, to trust, and to believe once more. The river flowed peacefully beneath the dawn light. The wilderness held its secrets yet, and the stranger remained her companion in the journey ahead. The past would linger, yes, but it would no longer control her. She had reclaimed her courage, her hope, and her life. And that, she knew, was the beginning of everything that would come next.